Welcome back to the Mad Genius Thesis. I am so excited for our deep dive today. We're going to be talking about Jean-Michel Basquiat.
Yeah, this is going to be great.
He's a really fascinating figure in the art world. And, this whole show, we kind of are looking at this link between creativity and mental illness.
Yeah.
And I think Basquiat is such a great example of that. He's this art world icon.
He is.
But his life was very tragic.
Yeah, it's very short.
So short. And he kind of epitomizes, I think, in a lot of ways, what people think of as the quote-unquote mad genius.
Right, and so we're kind of trying to unpack that. Figure out, is that too simple of a narrative?
Right, exactly.
Was there more to it?
Well, and he had, talk about a fascinating life. He was born in Brooklyn.
Right, in 1960?
Yeah.
To a Haitian father and a Puerto Rican mother.
And so right away, you have this multicultural background.
Absolutely.
Which you can see in his art.
Oh, yeah. It's infused in everything that he does.
All over the place.
So he was fluent in French, Spanish, and English. Wow.
And you see that he uses like little bits of all of those languages in his work.
In his artwork.
And that multicultural background, you see that also in the different, the kind of cultural and historical references that appear in his paintings.
Yeah, he pulls from everywhere.
He really does.
Which I think also makes him so interesting because he's not.
It's hard to categorize him.
That's hard to categorize him.
Right, yeah.
He's not just this one thing.
Absolutely not.
And his mom was really instrumental, I think, in kind of fostering that creativity. She was taking him to museums.
Yeah, when he was a kid, she would take him to the Brooklyn Museum, the Museum of Modern Art.
To MoMA?
The MoMA.
And he was fascinated by art.
Yeah, and in fact, there's this story about how when he was really young, he was fascinated by Picasso's Guernica.
Oh, wow.
Which, if you've ever seen Guernica, it's like this.
It's very intense.
It's huge.
Yeah. It's this very kind of frantic, chaotic depiction of the horrors of war. And, who knows what a child takes from that, but there's something about it that really captivated him.
Yeah, and stuck with him.
So
interesting. And then he actually, when he was 8, he got hit by a car.
Yeah, that's right.
And had to have his spleen removed.
Yeah, it was a pretty serious accident.
And so while he's recovering, his mom gives him a copy of Gray's Anatomy.
Yeah, the medical textbook.
Which is so interesting because you see that come back.
Oh, absolutely.
Later in his work.
The skeletal figures.
Yeah.
The anatomical drawings. It's like he was processing.
So fascinating.
Yeah, processing that trauma through his art.
Turning that pain into something.
Yeah.
Beautiful in a way.
Yeah, it's this really interesting way of dealing with something that must have been very frightening and traumatic for him as a kid.
Of course. So,
yeah.
He has this kind of complex upbringing. He's exposed to all of this great art. He's also going through, difficult things.
Right.
He ends up going to this alternative high school called Cydia School.
Yeah, which was known for encouraging creativity.
Yeah, kind of like a free...
It wasn't this kind of rigid, traditional educational environment.
Right, exactly. And he actually ends up leaving his home at 17.
Yeah, he runs away.
Starts living on the streets of Manhattan.
And this is where we start to see him really developing his artistic identity.
Right.
He's making and selling postcards.
Yeah, the little painted postcard.
Yeah, he's painting on found objects on clothing.
Right.
Anything he can get his hands on.
And he was in a band, too.
That's right.
Called Gray.
Yeah, which again, we see that reference to Gray's Anatomy.
Right, coming back.
Wow.
It's so interesting how certain things...
They stay with us.
Just stick with you and just keep influencing.
Keep popping up.
Yeah, it's incredible. But so he's living this almost bohemian lifestyle at this point.
Right. Very much part of the downtown New York scene.
Right. And he even has a brief stint as an actor.
Yeah, that's right. In 1981, he appears in this film called Downtown 81, which is also known as New York Beat Movie.
Interesting.
And it's this kind of a day-in-the-life look at the downtown New York art and music scene.
Oh, wow. So he's right in the thick of it.
He is.
But before that, even before the movie, he was already making a name for himself with his graffiti.
Yeah, and this is where Samo comes in.
Okay, let's talk about Samo.
So Samo is this kind of cryptic phrase that starts appearing on the walls of Soho in the late 70s.
And it stands for what?
Samo.
Samo.
And it stands for same old shit.
Okay.
And it was this collaboration between Basquiat and his friend Al Diaz.
Okay, so they were kind of a duo.
They were a duo.
And it was social commentary.
Yeah.
It wasn't just
That wasn't just tagging.
Just tagging their names.
Right.
There was this message behind it.
It was very much a critique of consumerism and the art world itself.
Wow, and they're doing this on the walls of Soho, which
Which is ironic.
is kind of like the center of the art world in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So they're like right in the belly of the beast.
They're going right to the source.
Yeah.
And one of the tags that they spray painted on a gallery wall was Samo as an alternative to playing art with the radical cheese section of Daddy's Funds. So they're very directly
Oh, wow.
calling out.
Falling out.
Like the hypocrisy of the art world.
Wow.
And the people who are treating art as this kind of status symbol.
Yeah, and this is like, what, the late 70s?
Yeah.
And then by the early 80s,
He's being embraced by that world.
he's a star.
Yeah, it's so interesting.
So he's like predicting his own trajectory.
It's like he was both critiquing the art world and also wanting to be a part of it.
Right, and knowing that he could like infiltrate it.
Yeah, he had that ambition.
Yes.
He had that drive.
Absolutely. And there's this great anecdote about how he told his dad, he's like, Papa, I will be very famous one day.
Yeah, and he was right.
Yeah.
He was absolutely right.
So, and his work starts appearing in these alternative exhibitions in New York.
Yeah, like the Times Square show in 1980.
The Times Square show.
And then the New York New Wave show in 1981.
And his style is so different from what's out there at the time.
Yeah, it's this collision of street art, pop culture, social commentary,
Yeah.
all these things kind of coming together.
And one critic even said, his paintings look like a mix of de Kooning and subway spray paint.
Which is a pretty good.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
Yeah, it captures that tension
Yeah.
between like this raw talent and the kind of established art world.
Yeah, that rawness.
The energy, the vibrancy.
And then in 1982, he has his first solo show at the Inninose Gallery.
And it sells out.
Sells out completely.
And he's only 22 years old at this point.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's like an overnight success story.
It's like a fairy tale almost.
It really is. But like all fairy tales, there's a dark side.
Yeah. Right, and we'll talk about that after the break. So we were just talking about Basquiat's like meteoric rise to fame.
Yeah, 22 years old. Solo show sells out. It's incredible.
It is, but as they say, it comes with a price, right?
Right. Fame is a double-edged sword, especially at that age.
Absolutely, and especially in the 1980s art world. I mean, can you imagine the pressure, the expectations?
The constant scrutiny from critics, collectors, the media.
It's a lot for anyone to handle, let alone someone who's also dealing with, personal struggles.
Right. And Basquiat was very open about his struggles with addiction.
And I think that kind of gets to this whole myth of the, quote, wild child artist, right?
Yeah, the media loved that narrative. It's sensational, it sells.
But it also, I think, kind of overshadows the real depth and complexity of his work.
Absolutely. It reduces him to this caricature, this stereotype,
Yeah, and it ignores the intellectual rigor, the deeply personal experiences, the social commentary that fueled his art.
He was engaging with complex themes of race, identity, history,
And his art wasn't just about expressing his inner turmoil. He was about reflecting the world around him, the injustices, the inequalities.
Right. He was a product of his time, and his art was a response to that time. Think about the social and political context of the 1980s.
The Reagan era, yeah.
Yeah, rising inequality, the crack epidemic, growing tensions around race and class.
And Basquiat's art becomes this mirror, right?
Reflecting all those anxieties, those contradictions, those unheard voices.
He was giving a voice to the voiceless, using his platform to address issues that were so often silenced.
Take the painting, The Death of Michael Stewart, for example. It's a raw, visceral response to a real-life incident of police brutality.
Yeah, a young black artist who was beaten to death by transit police.
Basquiat wasn't shying away from these harsh realities. He was bringing them to the forefront, demanding that we confront them.
And he was doing it with this incredible visual language, this fusion of street art, high art, history, pop culture.
It's like he was creating a new language altogether, one that's both personal and universal.
And speaking of universality, it's amazing how music, especially jazz, played such a huge role in his work.
Oh, absolutely. You can almost hear the rhythm, the improvisation in his brushstrokes.
It's like he's translating the energy of bebop onto the canvas.
He saw himself as part of that lineage, that black artistic tradition,
Like Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, those jazz legends who are breaking boundaries, pushing limits.
And he was doing the same thing with his painting, challenging conventions, defying categorization.
And then there's his use of text, which is so fascinating. It's not just decoration. It's like these words, these phrases, are integral parts of the composition.
Yeah, they add another layer of meaning, like a visual dialogue, a conversation between words and images.
Sometimes it's straightforward, like a headline ripped from a newspaper. And other times it's more poetic, more abstract, like a stream of consciousness.
It's that constant interplay between clarity and ambiguity, order and chaos that makes his work so compelling.
You're drawn in by the vibrancy, the energy, but then you're forced to pause, to contemplate, to unravel the layers.
He's inviting us into his mind, to experience the world through his eyes, this chaotic, vibrant, and ultimately tragic journey.
And it's a journey that continues to resonate with us today, right?
Absolutely. Basquiat's work is more popular than ever. It speaks to something deep within us, something about the human condition, the search for identity, the struggle for meaning in a chaotic world.
And he did it all on his own terms, defying expectations, breaking down barriers, challenging the very notion of what it means to be an artist.
He was a true original, a rebel with a cause, and his legacy continues to inspire and challenge us today.
It makes you think, what is it about Basquiat's work that makes it so timeless, so universally appealing?
That's a great question. I think it's his honesty, his vulnerability. He wasn't afraid to expose his inner world, his fears, his joys, his struggles.
He laid it all out there, on the canvas for the world to see.
And in doing so, he created art that speaks to the human experience in a way that transcends time and place.
He also challenged the art world's traditional power structures, didn't he?
Absolutely. He brought the perspectives and experiences of Black artists to the forefront, demanded recognition and respect.
And he did it with style and swagger. He became a fashion icon, blurring the lines between high art and street culture.
He was a true innovator, a game changer, and his influence can be seen everywhere, from fashion and music to film and literature.
But, this whole idea of him being a wild child, a rebel, it makes me wonder how the art world itself, particularly the critics and collectors who embraced him so quickly, contributed to his struggles.
That's a really important point. Some argue that the art market, with its, insatiable appetite for new talent, exploited his vulnerability.
He was young, Black, and suddenly thrust into this world of wealth and privilege.
It's a lot to handle for anyone, let alone someone battling addiction.
It's a cautionary tale in a way, a reminder that artistic genius often comes at a personal cost.
And it makes us question our own role as consumers of art. To what extent do we, through our fascination with the mad genius trope, perpetuate a system that can both celebrate and exploit artists, especially those from marginalized backgrounds?
It's a heavy question, and there are no easy answers.
No, but it's a conversation we need to have, especially as we continue to grapple with issues of race, inequality, and the commodification of art.
Well, I think Basquiat's story gives us a lot to think about, both in terms of his art and his life.
It certainly does. His legacy is complex and multifaceted, and it continues to challenge and inspire us today.
I remember reading about how Basquiat wasn't just painting on canvases, he was transforming everyday objects into pieces of art.
Oh, absolutely. Like that refrigerator he painted, he saw beauty and possibility and everything, and he wasn't afraid to experiment, to push those boundaries.
And it's impossible to talk about Basquiat without acknowledging his profound impact on the art world, right?
He challenged those traditional power structures, brought the perspectives and experiences of Black artists to the forefront. He was a voice for the marginalized, a champion for those whose stories were often overlooked.
And he did it all with this incredible style and swagger, which made him an icon. His influence can be seen everywhere.
A symbol of creative rebellion, a reminder that art can be a powerful force for social change.
It's incredible, right, how even though he died so young,
Yeah.
he left such a lasting impact.
A huge impact. I mean, his work is still so relevant today. It's like he was ahead of his time in so many ways.
Yeah.
And he just had this raw energy and this fearlessness that really resonated with people.
Yeah, and I think it still resonates today.
Yeah.
And one thing that I think is so interesting is how his work prefigured this whole rise of street art
Yeah.
as like a major force in the art world.
He was really blurring those lines between the gallery and the street.
Right.
He was taking these everyday material, things that you would find on the street and elevating them. Yeah.
To this realm of high art.
It's like he was saying art doesn't have to be.
It can be anything.
Yeah.
It can be anywhere.
Right.
It's about the idea. It's about the expression.
It's about the vision.
Yeah.
And I mean, he really helped pave the way for artists like Banksy,
Right.
Shepard Fairey.
Yeah, all these artists who've taken street art and really...
Brought it to the global spotlight.
Absolutely.
And it's it makes you think about like what art is.
Yeah.
Who gets to define it?
Right.
Where it belongs.
Those are questions that Basquiat was asking, back in the 80s.
Yeah. And they're still so relevant today.
Absolutely.
And so I guess as we kind of wrap up our deep dive into Jean-Michel Basquiat,
Yeah,
what is like the one thing,
the one takeaway.
yeah, the one takeaway you'd want our listeners to remember?
I think it's this. Basquiat was more than just this, mad genius like we've been talking about.
That label gets thrown around so much.
It does, and it's too simplistic, you know?
He was a complex individual navigating a challenging world,
Right.
and his art reflects that complexity.
Right.
He was a brilliant artist.
He was.
Incredibly innovative.
Yeah.
He left an indelible mark on the art world.
Yes, he did.
But he was also a human being struggling with very real personal demons.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to keep both of those truths in mind
All right.
as we appreciate his work,
Yeah.
as we learn about him,
Ah.
as we grapple with his legacy.
And that brings us back to the whole idea of this show.
Right, this connection between creativity and mental illness.
Right. Is there a connection?
Is there a connection?
It's more complex than that.
Right. Basquiat's story, I think, shows us
Yeah.
that genius can flourish amidst turmoil.
Uh-huh.
But it also reminds us of the fragility
Right,
of the
right.
human spirit.
Yeah. And the importance of,
Yeah.
recognizing those struggles.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
celebrating and supporting artists.
Right? Giving them the space,
And-
the
yeah.
resources, the support they need to create, but also to live fulfilling lives.
Right. To thrive as people.
To thrive as people, exactly.
So any final thoughts for our listeners as we
Yeah.
wrap up here?
I would just encourage everyone to go experience Basquiat's work for yourself.
Yes.
If you can see it in person,
Uh-huh.
there's nothing like standing in front of one of his paintings
Yeah.
and feeling that energy,
Uh-huh.
that rawness,
Yeah.
that power.
You can't capture it in a book or on a screen.
You can't.
Uh,
You really can't.
You really can't.
But even if you can't see it in person,
Yeah.
read about his life,
Mhm.
listen to the music that inspired him,
Right. Yeah.
Engage with his art
Yeah.
on your own terms
Yeah.
and allow it to, challenge your assumptions, provoke your thoughts,
Yeah.
and maybe even inspire your own
Yeah.
creative journey.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Jean-Michel Basquiat.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll be back next week with another fascinating exploration of the human mind and its creative potential.
Looking forward to it.
Until then, keep questioning and keep exploring.